This is Ernest Johnson, come back at you today with some wicked Christian hoax. LastDaysMinistry.us. The Jesus myth. This is how Christianity was started. This is the story of the mythical Jesus, the first written word that which was put down some 80 years after his existence on earth. The person Jesus, which was put together from a variety of information. In the days of old, Rome, while under Constantine, the concept of the Catholic or universal religion, which was the official Roman religion, is that which was a composite of various religious writings, which were brought together to form that which is known as the Christian religion. Many of these writings during that time were assembled from various sources and were brought into and comprised those books of the Bible. The evolution of the Bible. The deceptions and myths that is associated into the making or the origin of the stories that have been related, especially in the Old Testament, were literally taken in many cases word for word or concept for concept from earlier writings. For example, the story of Noah and his 4 sons having been taken from writings which long predated the stories in the Old Testament and which used terms and names for the sons which were identical to those reported in the Old Testament. The story of Moses as having been stolen from a Syrian myth had come down in relation to an entity named Mises, M-I-S-I-S, and also having a greater number of the stories within the Old Testament were simply the result of the Hebrew priest attempting to create a set of myths and stories by which they could organize their own religion, their own philosophy, in order to form a more cohesive society in those days. The works of this author go deeply into the finding that these earlier stories from Babylon, which was the source of the story of the Garden of Eden, through Syrian and other cultures and Indian records and stories of India. Even the New Testament is assembled from patterns related to stories taken from earlier writings, such as Zoroastrian, Mithrain, Krishna, Buddhism, and Egyptians, along with many other, in which many verses are literally paraphrasing earlier writings, and many of these stories attributed to the story of Jesus and were actually lifted directly out of these other writings. The story of Jesus at the well is one which was taken from earlier writings. It is very important that people realize the origins of the Bible did not come from the pen of God, but instead came from the earlier writings in different cultures and nations at the time these Hebrew priests put this work together. These stories were plagiarized, then became labeled heathen nations, whose philosophies were heathenistic, but this was only after their stories have been stolen. How symbols influence people. Throughout most of the last 2,000 years of the Piscean Age, people have been inclined toward open and shallow interpretations of stories at face value, rather than looking more deeply at hidden meanings. It has been the advent or the arrival of psychology to bring back the significance of symbolism, for in Freud's concern for the dream state, it emphasized the significance of symbols. And as symbols began to become more significant, people began to recognize symbolism in other levels that had previously been ignored or forgotten. However, in the past, most of the emphasis